Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. I hope you had a great Easter weekend. We are on day one of week 4 of our daily devotions. And as I thought about what we wanted to walk through this week, I was immediately brought back to a conversation I had with a friend last week. We were talking about just this whole coronavirus pandemic and kind of its effect on our families. And he looked at me and he said, Man, I don't know what to do. My wife is home from work. I'm home from work. The kids aren't going back to school. Everything's shut down. There's nowhere for us to go. We don't want to get sick. We find ourselves counting down the days until everything goes back to normal. And we just kind of feel like this is wasted time. And I thought about what he said, and I thought, this is such a unique situation for us because I think people are starting to settle in with the understanding that this thing isn't going away overnight. This thing could last for a while. It doesn't seem to be going away. And so we have to ask ourselves this question. During this season of life, am I going to, like my friend, am I going to sit back and just count the days until everything goes back to normal? Or am I going to use this as an opportunity to experience growth like I never have before? Am I going to use this as an opportunity to be intentional with the time I spend with my family, with my kids, the way I grow them, the way I lead them, the way I love my spouse, the way I love my neighbors, the way that I serve? And as I thought about this, I thought, there's got to be somebody in Scripture who's experienced isolation and just kind of thrived in it because of their reliance on God. And the first person that came to mind, honestly, was Paul. Paul was a guy who experienced this miraculous conversion and immediately just ran after God with everything that he had. And so this week, I want to walk us through Philippians. And now we're not going to walk through it chapter by chapter, even verse by verse, but we are going to look at some central ideas in the book. Now, it's only 4 chapters long, so I would encourage you guys, whatever it looks like, to read through it this week. Maybe you read all 4 chapters every day. Maybe you read a chapter a day. Maybe you break it up however you want, but I would encourage you guys to spend some time reading through Philippians and just be blessed by it. It is such an incredible book in the Bible, and I think God uses it in an incredible way to speak to us in a season of life where we need to be spoken to. So to give you some context of what's happening here in Philippians, Paul's sitting in prison. He hasn't committed any egregious crimes. He was just preaching the gospel, and so he's imprisoned. Thankfully, the way that it's set up, he can receive visitors. He can send and receive letters. And so in this moment, he's writing a letter to the church of Philippi, which is the church that he founded during his second missionary journey. Now, in this part of the passage, or in this part of the scripture, he's writing the letter basically for 2 reasons. Number one, he wants to thank the church of Philippi for sending him a gift through Epaphroditus. And number 2, he wants to just encourage them in their faith. There's some division going on in the church, and so he's stepping up and just encouraging them and trying to build them up and remind them that God is firmly in control. And so today, where I want to land is in Philippians chapter 1, and it's verses 12 and 13. And here's what it says, Philippians 1, 12 and 13. It says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. Let me read that last statement again, that my imprisonment is for Christ. Can you imagine if we walked through this whole coronavirus pandemic and we could look back with certainty that this season of life was for Christ? What a perspective to have. You see, as I read that, it's clear that Paul understood. He understood that his current circumstances, they weren't nearly as important as what he did with them. He understood that this whole season of life for him needed to be for Christ. It was a unique situation. He was going to have to get creative in the way he did it, which ultimately led to him leading guards to know who Christ was, and he didn't waste the time. And so I think it's so interesting what he says here at the very beginning. After he says, I want you to know, brothers, he says, what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. There's no victim mentality. There's no looking at it and going, woe is me. He simply understood the circumstance and understood that God could still use it in a big way. And so as we look at it, we've got to understand God is able to use any circumstance to advance the gospel. Any circumstance. Whatever you're in, whatever struggle you're experiencing, whatever trial you're going through, whatever season of life you're in, God can use it. I think of a time in my life where I felt like I was in a circumstance that God couldn't use. About 10 years ago, my wife and I decided to try and start a family, and we've shared the story countless times, but it's such a great illustration for what God is able to do. And so we tried to start a family, and we were immediately met with obstacles. There was infertility due to just a myriad of issues. There were surgeries and all these different things. And so for 3 years, 3 years, we constantly questioned why. We were angry with God. We felt like he had gone silent. We felt like we were a million miles away from him, and we just didn't know what to do. And it felt like such wasted time. And I'll never forget 3 years after we started trying to have a family. And we got this call about a little girl that needed to be fostered or adopted. And so we drive out to her great aunt's house because we're going to meet her for the first time just to figure out, is adoption the route that we want to go? And when we get to the house, pull into the parking lot or pull into the driveway, we open the doors, we step out, and we see this little girl swinging on a swing set with not a care in the world. And it was in that moment that I knew a couple things. Number one, I knew that we were going to walk out of that place parents, that she was going to become our daughter, and she later would. But number two, it was in that moment that 3 years of whys, 3 years of regret, 3 years of anger and frustration at God was immediately met with the peace of knowing why we went through what we went through. We went through infertility so that Haley could have a second chance at life. We went through infertility so that God could remind us that he's in control and he writes a better story. And for a long time, for several years now, we have felt like that chapter of our life, that going through infertility, questioning God, seeing him provide, that was kind of the end of that chapter, and we've moved on to other things in our story until this week. If you followed us on Easter Sunday, you saw Tiffany and Lexi get baptized. What you didn't know and what you didn't see was the fact that Tiffany is Haley's aunt and Lexi is Haley's cousin. And they're coming to know Christ. A huge moment in that journey started 10 years ago. My wife and I were going through infertility. Had we not gone through infertility, we never would have met Haley. And had we never met Haley, we wouldn't have adopted her. And if we wouldn't have adopted her, we wouldn't have built a relationship with her aunt and with her husband and with their kids. And it wouldn't have led to us inviting them to church and having conversations about what it means to know Christ. And this week, having the honor of baptizing them. You see, God can use every circumstance to advance the gospel. Had I known 10 years ago, when we were beginning our journey, that we were going to run into infertility, and it would lead to us adopting our daughter, and it would lead to 2 people in her family coming to know Christ and having eternal security, I would have started the journey 2 years sooner. But I didn't, and we never do. But it's always easier on the tail end of God being God that we have regret. And we look back on it and we say, man, I wish I wouldn't have wasted that time, or I wish I would have done this differently. Church, we are in a situation, we are in a season where we have the opportunity to start a new script, to say, I don't want to look back on this coronavirus season and have regrets. I don't want to ask why. I don't want to feel like it's wasted time. I want everyone to see my life come out of this pandemic and go, that season of their life was for Christ. But that can only happen if we have a monumental shift in our perspective as we navigate through this season of life. There has to be this moment where we finally understand that though this chapter is unpleasant, it's scary, it's uncertain, it is absolutely filled with cliffhangers, God is still in complete control. He's writing a better story than we could ever imagine. And once we understand that, we can begin to see the circumstances, not through the lens of their impact on us. Rather, we see them through the lens of how Christ can use them to be glorified. It's just that simple. So I want to encourage you in this. In this season, don't fall into the trap of thinking you have to just wait it out. Don't fall into the trap of thinking it's just inevitable that this is going to be wasted time and we just need to get to the other side of it and then things can get back to normal. Use this season to begin a monumental shift in your thinking. Use this season to alter your perspective of your purpose. Do that so that on the other side of this pandemic, you can look back. You can use it as a testimony and say with assurance that what happened during this season actually serves to advance the gospel. And people will look at your life. They will look at your actions. They will look at your response. And they will say with absolute certainty that this season in your life was for Christ. Be encouraged by that. Be challenged by that. Go about your day differently because of it, so that like Paul, no matter the circumstance, no matter the situation, God can use you in a huge way. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.